In this documentary, filmmaker Kevin Douglas Wright randomly selected people born between 1946 and 1953. He asked each of them 6 different questions. Watch as the answers to these questions tell a story about someone teaching something that has been responsible for destroying people, cities, states, and countries in front of our eyes for hundreds of years. Now, let's meet everyone.
My name is Margie.
My name is Miriam.
My name is Mike.
In 1946.
1946.
I was born in 1952.
I was born in December of 1951.
I was born in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Philadelphia, in West Oak Lane, and then when I was 13, we moved outside of the city to the suburbs to Broomall. And I spent the first few years living with my grandparents, because he had retired by then, in Philly. And then so I lived with them until I was 16, and then I escaped to Miami Beach.
In Joliet, Illinois.
Well, the first couple of years was in South Carolina, Anderson, South Carolina. And so she left there and brought me to Fort Lauderdale to live with my aunt and uncle.
Oh, wow. And about how old were you when you came to
2 or 3.
Oh, so
It was the first area of Fort Lauderdale where the NAACP came in and started buying up homes. We were the last white family in the neighborhood. Of course, the guy on this side of us was a lawyer, and people on the other side of us were both school teachers. They were professionals, you know. So they were not what you expect when you think of, or at least in those days, when you thought of black people.
right.
You know. And that helped me to understand that people are people.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. That plus the fact that, you know, I had a nanny when I was growing up that treated me better than my parents did, you know.
Wow. And the
So-
nanny was black?
Yeah.
She was black. One type?
No, it was my elementary school was here, and then the Catholic elementary school was here. So we had a pretty good split of Catholic and Jewish and other Gentile people in the mix. There, at that time, were no people of color in my neighborhood.
Our very next door neighbors across to the right were, I don't remember their name. Was it Lukanich? Anyway, you know, they were white. And I remember the little girl, and everybody had more than we did.
Or mix of kids?
It went from all white kids to a mix to all black kids.
That's
Now,
how
yours-
Philly changed.
Your school, when you were little,
Mhm.
was it all Jewish?
No,
Oh, it was just
no, but it was majority because
Majority.
the Christian kids all went to
one that was nearby.
St. Rose.
So the neighborhood was
Mixed.
it was mixed.
It was mixed. I had white neighbors on the other side of the street. They had chickens in their yard.
Over the years.
Once the first family sold to the NAACP, their neighbors naturally had to sell because they weren't going to run around black people, you know.
Right.
There goes the neighborhood,
Yeah.
you know, it's one of these attitudes. And but I got along most of the time.
Right.
I mean, realistically, there's just as much racism on one side of this as there is on the other.
Yeah.
Which I learned about down the road once my children are grown.
Right.
once I got old enough to go to the library myself and go ice skating myself, I read through the library.
Well, I had a pretty sad childhood. There wasn't a lot of fun.
All the basic stuff. I mean, hide and seek and.
I read through the books in the library,
Wow.
and I think I was 11 or 12, and I wanted to take out the Diary of Anne Frank, and I had to get the librarian to sign off because it wasn't in the kids section. But she said, "You've read everything here, go for it." So I read Diary of Anne Frank when I was 11 or 12. But I did love to roller skate as well. When I was in the house, I did have a radio in the room. Mm-hmm. My family's all musicians. I told you.
I remember sometimes our father would take us to the old Sears store, mm-hmm. and they had, like, when you came into the store, they would have, like, to your left, they actually were selling like a pet shop type of part of the store, which is something they probably never do anymore. They're completely separate. But the entrance that we came through was kind of like a pet shop.
Kickball and all the stuff you play at school, but now you're out of school, so you're playing it at home. And, get groups of guys and girls together. And
yeah, which is nice. So I would stay in my room and sing all the songs.
No way.
Act them out. And we had my mother had her Steinway grand in the living room, but she had an old upright in the mm-hmm. basement, so I would go down there and pound on that. So and then music and roller skating and talking to my girlfriends, sneaking out at night and talking to them.
And then once you came through the door into the regular part of the store, there was the candy counter. That was magic to me. They had bonbons, which I loved. They had I remember they had the chocolate milk drops. My father liked those. They were like these chocolates with creams. And then they had these candies that they call snowballs, and you cannot buy those now. They were almost the size of a golf ball, I guess, and they were white, and they were coated in this real pretty sugar that just sparkled like diamonds. And I remember I could just stand there and look at the candy counter. Once I got in the candy counter, I was transfixed. And I remember my father liked those chocolate things, but I was always wanting if I could get a snowball, I was happy. They had like a nut in the middle. I think it was a hazelnut. Uh-huh. And man, to this day, you can't get them. Wow. As far as I know, nobody sells them like that. I've had substitutes where people tried to duplicate it, but nothing like they used to have in that old Sears store. Wow. They were unmatched. And so that was my happiness, I guess.
Yeah, going to the candy store.
One. And then 17 in Miami Beach. My grandfather was ill. He was in the Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami Beach, and I used to take the bus to go see him every day. And the bus driver was a man of color, a black man from Miami named Nick. And we left to take my grandfather to Bethesda Naval Hospital, where he did die. When I came back, I went on the bus again looking for Nick because he was so nice. I used to sit there and listen and talk. He was just a nice guy, And I started dating him.
No way.
Yes, I did. And so how did it become apparent to me? My mother, when we were moving to the suburbs, I heard her make some remarks about if the neighbors don't stop, she was going to sell the house to well, the word was a Negro. She never was overtly racist. I think she was just a nasty person. I don't think she was really
Right.
hating black
right.
people. She was nasty to me. You know, I mean,
Right.
they were just, they were up for grabs. I was, I got the primary. But then when he would pick me up, I'd come out, and we lived on the Venetian Causeway, and the last island right by the bridge, and I come out and get in his car and I sit on the floor.
No way.
Well, we're talking 19.
That's what I was going to ask.
You know.
What year? Around what year? It was 19...
56. 6 and 7 is how.
13.
Okay.
So, you'd say probably 60s, somewhere.
Yeah, it was 17. So it was around 62, 63.
Wow,
My grandfather
yeah.
died in 63, January of 63. So it was 1963 when we started dating.
And that was 1963, Miami Beach.
Miami Beach.
Wow. So you would meet him and
He'd pick me up at the bus stop, and I'd get in the car and sit on the floor, in the front seat on the floor, and we'd go to his house. Or they took me to a place, Sir John's. I had ID. I mean, I was rolling. I wasn't a little shrinking violet at that time. I had ID that said I was 23 or 4 or something. So we did go to this, which I think was the only integrated place except for maybe Alton Road, Bell Barth's, which was a gay club, but I saw Red Fox there.
No way.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was very young. I was
No
really
way.
young. The lesbians loved me and they took me in with them. So, yeah, but we went to the St. John's Hotel, and it was a bar, and it was very dark, and there were mixed couples there, and that's, to me, is the only place ever.
I must have been in kindergarten, and we all went to this school called Park School that we walked to, and that was back in the days when they let kids my age walk. It ain't like that now, but walk back and forth to school. I was like 5 years old walking by myself back and forth to school. Back in those days, things were different. I'm not saying there weren't boogeymen out there, but not like now. Now, not like now when it's all organized and the child human trafficking and everything and all the stuff that's going on now. It wasn't organized. It was just a neighborhood boogeyman you had to worry about. And if he's standing in the alley and say, "Want some candy, little girl," you just keep walking. And that was pretty much all you had to do as far as that goes. But okay, so I was passing this apartment building on the corner of Ohio Street on the way home, and there was these dirty little white kids playing in the yard, and they were like filthy, just nasty looking, and they was like calling me nigger. Nigger. And I looked at them, I was like, I don't know what that is, but it definitely doesn't sound good, And so I was like, I better find out what this is. And so that's when I came home, told my mother, I said, "Ma, what is a nigger?" And that's when I got my first civil rights lesson.
Yeah.
And it was very discouraging.
Yeah. How did you feel about
Downtrodden.
it? Yeah.
Kind of a feeling of hopelessness.
Yeah.
The main thing was when I would go to the store. It was back in those days in the Woolworths. You had the 2 water fountains next to each other. One was white and one was colored.
Wow.
And I would my cousin would be on this water fountain, I'd go to the other one.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the difference. You can't drink from that one. Why not? It says right on there, colored. I don't know what that is.
Wow.
I didn't. Had no idea.
And around, that probably was what, like the 19...
mid-50s. Mid to late 50s, yeah.
But I know my uncle, here's another story for you on that particular issue. My uncle was a DJ at the time, and he would come visit his parents, and when he came, he brought his tape recorder, big old tape recorders, and he would go to the hotels. You know, this is, who was it? This is Ella Fitzgerald, and I listen to Bud Sobel when I'm in, where was he working? Somewhere in Tennessee, that kind of spot. So he would go around to the hotels, and you know, you make appointments to have them record. And it was Ella, my very favorite, and she was singing at the, is it Ella? Might have been Johnny Mathis actually. I don't remember who it was, but it was an African American musician, singer, and it's funny I was basing on it. Can't believe I am. Anyway, he came back from doing that, and he was like, I can't say he was upset and he was ready to throw things in the house, but he was really perturbed because she wasn't, I was a woman, she was not allowed to stay at the Fontainebleau. She was performing at the Fontainebleau.
No way.
She had to stay across the street. They had a Broad Waters or Broad something little motel right across the street from Fontainebleau, and that's where she had to stay. It wasn't until Frank Sinatra said, "I'm coming down." With Sammy Davis, and you know,
Right.
if we don't walk in the front door and stay here, you'll never see us again. I think he's the one that actually integrated the hotels in Miami Beach.
way.
Yeah, shortly thereafter. But my uncle was pretty. He couldn't believe it. You know, things had changed, but they still had to have anybody of color that worked in Miami Beach had to not only be off Miami Beach by sundown, or had to have. They did it slick. They did it slick. Everybody who had a job in Miami Beach had to go get a police card.
No.
But the reason was because they wanted black people to.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
I ended up getting an opportunity to become a female. I was already a female. To become a sheet metal apprentice.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so
Or like
I am part of Cleveland history. I am Cleveland, Ohio's first female sheet metal apprentice, and this happened around the year 1975.
So, over the years, I developed, you know, just a kind of thick skin towards people who had attitudes around, you know, racial attitudes.
Right.
Until my stepfather came along. And he wasn't in the Klan when he first met my mom. He joined when he got into business because it opened business avenues for him. Banks, you know. He got loans, got business thrown at him, government contracts, all kinds of stuff, because he was a Klan man, you know.
And about how old were you when your stepfather came into
11, I think, probably 13 by the time he started into business and he got involved with the Klan. And I was old enough to understand that, you know, it wasn't a good thing, you know.
Had you heard about it before he came into your...
Really, no. I mean, I'd never had cause to give it any consideration. And even growing up around the black people I was growing up around, it wasn't something that they spoke about.
Right.
You know, which I discovered later why, you know. There's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety in dealing with people like that, and I can understand that. I mean...
my grandmother employed, I have like 3 or 4 memories of myself under the age of 5, and 2 or 3 of them involve a woman named Gay Phillips, who worked for my grandmother and then worked for my mother in the house. And she was so kind to me and so sweet. And so Gay came to work for my mother, and I used to come home, running home on Fridays, just, you know, at lunchtime, and then after school and sit in the basement. I think she arranged her schedule so she could do like the washing and the ironing in the basement. And she just sat there and listened to me and did all that sugar stuff. And she was so kind to me. And my mother fired her. I guess I was 10-ish. 9, 10, I don't remember.
And she was just Black American, or was she
Black.
from the island?
No.
Just regular Black American
from West Philly, yeah. Big lady. I've looked for some of her family when I was near Philly, because I just wanted to tell them how wonderful she was and the difference that she made in my life. But anyway, my mother fired her and said some nasty stuff about her, which I refuse to believe is true. I think that my mother lost some stuff.
Right.
Because it happened later to me. My mother must have lost her bracelet, and then she blamed it on me. So when that happened, I said, the light went off. So,
I didn't really run into any problems until I actually went to work as a sheet metal apprentice at, it was in Brooklyn, Ohio. It's a suburb of Cleveland. And, I felt like a monkey in a glass cage, because the men watched me, and it was like, you know how you go to the zoo and you peer at the animals? There was very few black men there. Most of them were white. And I did get sexually harassed there. I found out that they were following me to the bathroom and watching me when I was in the bathroom. I had this one married white man asking me to find a girlfriend so that me and him and we could go on a double date, and all kinds of inappropriate things happened.
When I really started to see that everybody else thought there was a difference that was notable was in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, when the riots started. At my own little junior high school, when the riots took off, there was only 2 or 3 white kids in the school. Wow. So I would go up, there was a whole ladder that led up to the top of the gym. And I would sit up there on top of that gym and just watch as the police came and all the craziness was going on. And then when everything would calm down, I'd calm down, go home through the back way. But most of the people that I knew me.
Right.
And I was actually safe. It was just, I didn't know everybody.
Right.
So by virtue of that, I was going to stay out of everybody's way. So hiding out on top of the gym, or, someplace where people couldn't easily put their hands on me.
Right.
Was just self-preservation.
Yeah.
And so what ended it for me was, I was sent out to a job site, and I was handed this enormous elbow of a duct pipe. The client, I don't know if they were setting me up to discourage me or what, but it worked. Because they handed me this elbow that must have weighed at least 50 pounds. Set me up on a ladder. I'll tell you something. If you want to get in shape, that's good work, because I was eating anything I wanted and I was still losing weight. I mean, that was...
At that time?
I was 22.
Oh, wow.
And so they sent me up on this ladder with carrying this 50-pound, elbow or whatever it was. And they said, go up that ladder. I don't know if they were supposed to be doing, because it really wasn't safe at all. They might have been just setting me up to drive me away. And they said, go up, because I wouldn't date anybody.
Right.
If you want to call it dating. Anyway, so climbed up this ladder. I made it up there. Then he said, now, you have to attach it to that pipe and hammer it in. So I would have to be strong enough stand on a ladder, hold a 50-foot-pound pipe, and hammer it in place. So that was crazy. And so that didn't really impressed upon me the dangers of the sheet metal.
No, it was laughable. He hated it when, I talked about the black guys on my football team, and how cool it was, to have friends that were different, well, they're not really your friends. What do you mean? You don't even know them, I had a friend come over for dinner one weekend. His parents had gone out of town, and he was going to be staying with his grandmother. But I thought it'd be cool if after practice he'd just come over to my place and had dinner. My stepfather walked around the corner, took a look at the table, and then there was a 9th grader that was just about as big as he was, sitting in the chair there. And we were having dinner and talking back and forth. And my mother comes around the other corner and says, "Ray, hold on." And he went back around the corner and he sat down in the living room in his chair and put his feet up. And she took a plate out to him and fed him. And he kept his mouth shut. He didn't say anything. He waited until after Paul left. And comes around to me and says, "Don't you ever do that to me again." I said, "What? What did I do to you?" "That doesn't happen here." And this friend of mine, his parents are out of town. Grandma doesn't get out of work until such and such time. He came for a dinner. So we were eating. Not in my house. "Okay, this is your house." "Okay. My family put you in this business, put the money up for you to be in business, Here I am, I'm only like 13 at this point, telling him off, And his attitude was, "Matters not where money came from, that's how I support you and your mother." I was like, "Well, that's your choice. I won't bother you, you don't bother me."
Yeah.
And I stayed locked in my room pretty much the whole time I was growing up, until I moved out.
Did your stepfather's views change at all throughout his whole life, or he stayed this?
No, he really was that way the rest of his life. He fell into that crowd and just ate it up. I guess from the time, his parents had probably laid that on him. That was another thing I learned down the road, and this was when I learned about the other side of it. My son, in first grade, was going to Martin Luther King Elementary School, and he got into the, I don't know if you know what the Makers are. It's a black organization that promotes, education.
Okay.
So the better a kid does in school, they get to join the Makers, and then they mentor them and give them extra credits,
right,
and help them along a little bit. And my son was the first white kid that got in, and was recommended. So we went, and here was all these black families, and one little white kid, and I mean he was white too, sitting up there, waiting to get his jacket, and of course, the mumbling started, and the whispers and all of that, but nobody said anything derogatory to either my wife or myself,
right,
or to my son. So we sat through it and had a good time, and as we were leaving, somebody put their hand on my shoulder and said, "You shouldn't come back."
What?
And I just looked at him and I says, "That's up to him," and kept walking. And I asked my son about it later on, and I guess my wife got scared, and she had said, I'd rather he didn't go.
No.
So he kind of didn't go back to that afterwards, even though he had qualified for it. But it was.
Yeah, see, that's the
It was
reverse.
just as, it was just as much the other side as it was
yeah.
The difference being that, you know, I can understand why the black people get so upset with the white people. I don't understand why white people get so upset with the black people. But, you know, like I said, and then here we are at this predominantly black school. Get involved with the fundraisers, and on Martin Luther King Day, we were marching with the whole crew of people from the school, and we marched over to Dillard High School. And we were setting up the fundraiser for the elementary school, you know, and people, I mean, just out of the crowd were coming by. Well, don't buy anything from them. Those people are white. Come over here. And they're not selling anything to do with helping out the school or anything else. This is stuff that they're doing out of their front yards, you know, just so that they can put a few extra bucks in their pocket. And I'm like, my wife's losing her mind, you know, when are we going to do anything for the school? People like this running around. Hey, it's a movable feast, you know.
Wow.
To take it as it comes. And,
so it's really just the reverse, like.
Like I said, it's as much one direction as it is the other, but I can understand why in the black families in the black neighborhoods they feel the way they do. The oppression, the anger, you know, the injustice, the bull, you know, that's driven these people. I mean, I'd been nuts.
Yeah,
I'd have actually been nuts.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could personally take that and still yes sir and no sir to anyone.
How do you see the future? Do you see it getting better? Do you see that something still needs to be done?
How do I feel about what's happening? What's happening is so distressing and so frightening. It's like every single thing that we've done, that we've tried to do, is being attacked. Everything, our very existence is being attacked. That's how I feel. I feel threatened, I feel frightened, and I feel determined not to give up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like we were saying earlier, it's what you learn around the people you're around as you're growing. Right. If I had grown up around nothing but racists, I'm pretty sure I'd have been a racist too.
Yeah.
Of course, I think somewhere along the way I'd have had a little problem with it.
So I mentioned that I have 2 grown children, but I also have 7 grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
8 now.
Wow.
I have, my son he's 35 and he just had his first child. So now I have 8 grandchildren. Wow. And I have great-grandchildren. So I'm a great-grandmother, you know. And so I'm 66 years old. I feel like this isn't my fight. I feel at this point I'm fighting for them.
Yeah.
I'm fighting for them. Fighting for their future.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel when people finally started to take a stand, Martin Luther King,
Right.
You know, making his point without any violence whatsoever, which really pushed the buttons. they made their point, you know, and it was a good point. And
let me put it this way. Nelson Mandela said, good and evil are always at war with one another. Have always been at war with one another, and all good men must choose.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's each individual.
Yes.
You know, fighting that
You
battle.
have to decide what side you're on.
Mm-hmm.
If you supposedly can't decide, you're on the wrong side.
Mm-hmm.
You have to decide. If you're saying, I can't decide, then you're on the wrong side.
Yeah.
You have to decide.
Yeah.
it's a sick country, but
Yeah.
it's got to get better.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to find that cure for common stupidity. They say there's no cure for the common cold, but there is a cure for common stupidity. It's called education.
Yeah.
And learn, because that's one thing I've been proud of my entire life, is that I take a personal inventory and I try and make myself be a better person.
Right.
I know to this day that sometimes those old attitudes and, you know, prejudices
Mm-hmm.
will still pop up, and I have to suppress that.
Yeah.
You know, if I don't, it just
Right.
comes out as anger and craziness, and you know, I really don't think there's a lot of place for anger and craziness in this country. You know, we've got too much of it now.
Yeah.
You know, in politics alone. Never mind day to day getting by in the world.